You step into the flickering gloom of a 13th century monastery, the air thick with incense and whispered sins. The stone walls echo with chants, but beneath the holy facade, a darker truth festers. A monk, cloaked in piety, has turned this sacred haven into a den of depravity, his vows shattered by lust and power. His name, whispered in fear, is a stain on the church's honor, his scandals shaking the faithful to their core. This is the tale of the most perverted monk of the Middle Ages, a man of God whose desires corrupted cloisters into cauldrons of vice. Join us as we unveil his story, where faith and sin collide in a firestorm of betrayal. You stand in the shadowed cloister of a 13th century Benedictine monastery, the year 1260, where the air is heavy with the scent of damp stone and burning incense. The flicker of candlelight dances on the walls, casting ghostly shapes that seem to whisper secrets too dark for holy ground. Before you, a young novice, barely 16, kneels in prayer, his tonsured head bowed, his voice trembling as he recites the Benedictine vows: chastity, poverty, obedience. His eyes, wide with devotion, gleam with dreams of serving God, yet the weight of the world presses close. Beyond the chapel's chants, you hear murmurs, rumors of a monk, a man of God, whose desires have twisted this sacred haven into a den of sin. You clutch your rough-spun robe, heart pounding, as the echoes of his name ripple through the stone corridors, a name that will soon shake the church to its core. This is the world of medieval monasticism, where monasteries stood as fortresses of faith in a Europe torn by war, plague, and ambition. Monks were the guardians of souls, their lives dedicated to prayer, scholarship, and the preservation of knowledge. You imagine the scriptorium, its air thick with the scent of vellum and ink, where monks labor over illuminated manuscripts, their quills scratching praises to God. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, governed their lives, demanding celibacy to purify their hearts, poverty to free their souls, and obedience to bind them to divine will. Monasteries from Cluny to Canterbury were not just spiritual havens but economic powers, controlling vast lands and wealth, their abbots wielding influence rivaling nobles. Yet this power was a double-edged sword, tempting men with desires that their vows forbade. The monk at the heart of our story, let us call him Brother Anselm, a name drawn from the shadows of chronicles like those of Matthew Paris, entered this world with promise. Born to a minor noble family, perhaps in England's lush Midlands, he was sent to the monastery as a second son, his path chosen not by faith, but by family strategy. You see him as a boy, his eyes bright with intellect, his voice carrying the cadence of Latin psalms. His superiors note his charisma, his skill with words, a gift that could raise him to abbot or plunge him into scandal. Chronicles of the time, such as those by Gerald of Wales, whisper of monks like him, men whose piety masked darker impulses, their vows clashing with the fire of human weakness. Anselm's story, though partly legend, is rooted in truth. The Middle Ages were rife with tales of clerical corruption, where sacred vows crumbled under temptation's weight. Monasteries were not immune to the sins of the world. You walk the cloister's silent arches, the cold stone beneath your feet, and hear faint echoes of laughter, not all of it holy. The wealth of monasteries, tithes, land grants, golden reliquaries, drew ambitious men, some seeking power rather than salvation. By the 13th century, the church's wealth rivaled kings, and monasteries like St. Albans or Cluny were economic hubs, their cellars stocked with wine, their tables laden with feasts. Chronicles report excesses, monks dining on roasted swan, their vows of poverty mocked by silk robes. The vow of chastity too was tested. You imagine a novice, his face flushed, overhearing whispers of forbidden acts in the dormitory's shadows, acts that would make the saints weep. The rule demanded purity, but human nature whispered indulgence, and some monks, like Anselm, listened. Anselm's rise was swift, his intellect and charm winning favour. You see him in the chapter house, his voice resonant as he debates theology, his smile disarming even the sternest prior. By his 20s he is appointed cellarer, then prior, his ambition cloaked in piety. Chronicles hint at such figures. Men like John of Wallingford, accused of vice in later tales, though evidence is murky. Anselm, whether real or composite, embodies these stories. A monk whose gifts made him a star, but whose desires cast a shadow. You envision him in his cell, the candlelight flickering, his prayers faltering as he wrestles with temptation. "God, keep me pure," he might have whispered, his voice trembling. But the monastery's wealth, its isolation, its power, stir darker thoughts. The line between devotion and desire blurs, a spark that will soon ignite a scandal. The psychological toll of monastic life was immense. You imagine Anselm alone, the silence of his cell deafening, his mind torn between divine calling and human longing. The vow of chastity, meant to elevate, often became a cage, isolating monks from love, family, intimacy. Chronicles note cases of despair, monks fleeing cloisters, others succumbing to drink or lust. The Church, aware of these failings, launched reforms like the Cluniac movement or the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 to curb excesses, but enforcement was uneven. You hear a prior's stern warning, "The devil tempts the idle heart." For Anselm, the temptation is not just flesh but power, the thrill of bending others to his will, of turning sacred spaces into playgrounds for his desires. The spices of this story lie in its human drama. You envision a novice stumbling upon Anselm in a darkened corridor, his silhouette entwined with another, a forbidden act that shocks the boy's faith. "Brother, what sin is this?" the novice might have whispered, his voice trembling, only to be silenced by Anselm's charm. God sees all, but forgives the weak. These imagined moments, grounded in Chronicles' hints of scandal, breathe life into the past. The monastery, a fortress of faith, becomes a crucible of sin, its walls hiding secrets that will soon spill into the light. You feel the tension, the air thick with unspoken truths, as Anselm's star rises, his vows fraying under the weight of ambition. The medieval world was no stranger to clerical scandal. Chronicles, like those of Matthew Paris, brim with tales of monks accused of sodomy, lechery, or simony, though often exaggerated to push reformist agendas. You hear the townsfolk outside the monastery gates, their voices bitter. These monks, drunk on wine and lust, mock God's law. Yet the Church, protective of its power, often shielded its own, allowing figures like Anselm to thrive until their sins grew too loud to ignore. This is the paradox of the sacred veil. A monk's vow was a shield, but also a mask, hiding desires that could corrupt even the holiest halls. As Anselm's shadow grows, so do the whispers. You stand in the refectory, the clink of spoons against wooden bowls drowned by murmurs of his excesses. "He leads us astray," a monk might have whispered to another, their eyes darting to Anselm's seat at the high table. The stage is set for a scandal that will shake the monastery, the church, and the faithful beyond. This is but the first chapter of a tale where faith and sin collide, where a man of God becomes a symbol of depravity, his monastery a den of secrets waiting to be exposed. Join us as we unravel this story, where the sacred veil is torn, revealing the human frailty beneath. You stand in the grand chapter house of a 13th century Benedictine monastery, 1265, where the air hums with the scent of polished wood and the weight of unspoken ambitions. The vaulted ceiling arches overhead, its stone carved with saints whose eyes seem to follow the figure at the centre of the room. He is Brother Anselm, no longer the trembling novice of 5 years past, but a man of 25, his tonsured head gleaming under candlelight, his voice resonant as he addresses the gathered monks. His words, laced with scripture and charm, flow like honey, winning nods from the stern-faced abbot. Yet beneath his pious facade, a shadow flickers, a hunger for power that burns brighter than his prayers. You clutch the edge of your rough-spun robe, heart pounding, sensing the spark of a man whose rise will ignite a scandal that shakes the very walls of this sacred place. Anselm's journey began in the shadow of a noble family's ambition, a second son sent to the monastery to secure divine favour and earthly influence. You see him as a boy, arriving at the abbey's gates, his eyes wide with awe at the towering spires, his heart torn between faith and the world he left behind. Chronicles like those of Matthew Paris describe such men. Young nobles entering monastic life, not always for devotion, but for opportunity. Their families eyeing the church's wealth and power. The monastery, a fortress of faith, is also a crucible of ambition. Its lands stretching across counties, its coffers filled with tithes and relics. By the 13th century, abbeys like St. Albans or Cluny rival secular lords in influence, their abbots dining with kings, their scriptoria producing treasures of knowledge and gold. Anselm's intellect sets him apart. You envision him in the scriptorium, his quill dancing over vellum, crafting manuscripts that blend theology with poetry. His superiors, noting his skill, promote him swiftly, first to cellarer, managing the monastery's stores, then to prior, second only to the abbot. Historical records, such as those from the Chronicle of Bury St. Edmunds, note monks rising through charisma and cunning, their piety a mask for ambition. Anselm's voice, rich with conviction, sways the chapter house. God calls us to stewardship, he might have declared, his eyes meeting the abbot's, a smile hiding his true desires. You hear the monk's murmurs of approval, but also the first whispers of doubt. He seeks glory, not God. The monastery's wealth is a siren's call. You walk its cloisters, the air thick with the scent of wax and wine, and see golden chalices in the chapel, silk vestments in the sacristy. Chronicles report excesses, monks feasting on venison, their vows of poverty mocked by opulence. The rule of Saint Benedict demands simplicity, but wealth breeds temptation, and Anselm, now privy to the abbey's riches, feels its pull. You imagine him in the cellar, his fingers brushing barrels of French wine, his mind wandering from stewardship to indulgence. This is God's bounty, he might have whispered to himself, justifying the flicker of greed in his heart. The vow of chastity too is tested. The monastery's isolation, meant to foster purity, becomes a breeding ground for secret desires. Anselm's charisma is his greatest weapon. You see him in the refectory, his laughter disarming even the grimmest monks, his stories of saints laced with wit. He wins allies among the younger novices, their eyes bright with admiration, and even the townsfolk beyond the gates speak his name with awe. Yet this charm hides a darker edge. You envision a late-night encounter, Anselm lingering in the dormitory, his hand resting too long on a novice's shoulder, his voice low. God forgives the heart's weaknesses. The boy, confused, pulls away, but the moment plants a seed of unease. Chronicles like Gerald of Wales hint at such scandals. Monks accused of unnatural sins, their acts cloaked in the monastery's silence. The psychological toll of this double life is crushing. You imagine Anselm in his cell, the candle flickering as he kneels in prayer, his mind a battlefield. Lord, guide my soul, he might have whispered, his voice trembling, but the silence answers with temptation. The vow of chastity, meant to elevate, feels like a chain, isolating him from human warmth. Historical accounts note monks struggling with celibacy, some fleeing to taverns, others succumbing in secret. Anselm's ambition, once a spark, now burns hotter, his piety a mask for desires he dares not name. You feel his turmoil, his heart torn between the divine calling he swore to uphold and the human longings he cannot suppress. The monastery itself is complicit, its wealth and power fostering a culture of indulgence. You hear the clink of coins in the almonry, the laughter at feasts that defy the rule. Reformers, like those of the Cluniac movement, decry such excesses, but change is slow. Anselm, as prior, wields authority over novices and lay brothers, his influence growing with each favour granted. You envision him in the chapter house, deflecting a monk's concern. Brother, we serve God in our way, his smile disarming, his words masking the truth. Chronicles of the time, like those of Roger of Wendover, report abbots abusing power, their monasteries becoming dens of vice. Anselm's rise is a mirror of these tales, his charisma a beacon, his ambition a shadow. The spices of this story lie in its human drama. You imagine a novice, eyes wide, catching Anselm in a forbidden act, a fleeting glance in the bathhouse, a whispered promise in the dark. God sees all, Anselm might have said, his voice smooth, but the novice's heart races with fear. These moments, though speculative, are grounded in historical whispers of monastic scandal, making the past vivid. The monastery, a sanctuary of faith, becomes a stage for ambition, its walls hiding secrets that will soon spill into the light. You feel the tension, the air thick with unspoken sins, as Anselm's star climbs higher, his vows fraying under the weight of power. The medieval church was no stranger to such figures. Chronicles brim with tales of corrupt clerics, their sins exaggerated by reformist pens, but rooted in truth. You hear the townsfolk outside, their voices bitter. These monks, drunk on power, defile God's house. Yet the church, protective of its authority, often shielded its own, allowing men like Anselm to flourish until their sins grew too loud. This is the paradox of the cloister, a place of divine pursuit, yet a crucible for human frailty. As Anselm's influence grows, so do the whispers, their echoes reaching beyond the monastery's walls, setting the stage for a scandal that will test the faith of all who know him. This is but the second chapter of a tale where ambition and sin intertwine, where a monk's rise foreshadows a fall that will shake the church. You stand in the chapter house, watching Anselm's smile charm the monks, and sense the storm brewing. His power is a flame, bright but dangerous, and the monastery, once a beacon of holiness, teeters on the edge of infamy. Join us as we delve deeper, where the sacred veil frays, revealing the darkness beneath a man of God's ambition. You stand in the shadowed dormitory of a 13th century Benedictine monastery, 1267, where the air is thick with the musk of unwashed wool and the weight of secrets too heavy for sacred walls. The moonlight spills through narrow windows, casting silver slivers across straw-strewn floors, where whispers replace the chants of vespers. In a darkened corner, Brother Anselm, now prior and poised to become abbot, lingers too long with a young novice, his voice low, his hand grazing the boy's arm. The novice's eyes widen, caught between fear and confusion, as Anselm's words, smooth as oil, promise absolution for sins not yet named. You clutch your robe, heart racing, as the monastery, once a fortress of faith, crumbles into a den of sin under the weight of one man's depravity. Anselm's corruption, long simmering beneath his charismatic facade, now spills into the open, staining the monastery's sanctity. No longer the promising scholar of his youth, he is a man of 30, his ambition twisted into indulgence, his vows of chastity and poverty mocked by his actions. Chronicles like those of Gerald of Wales and Matthew Paris brim with tales of such monks, men accused of unnatural acts, their monasteries transformed into havens of vice. Though Anselm is a composite figure, his story echoes real scandals. Monks exploiting their authority, using wealth and isolation to indulge forbidden desires. You see him in the refectory, his laughter too loud, his goblet of wine refilled beyond the rule's limits, his eyes lingering on novices with a hunger that belies his holy robes. The accusations against Anselm are as varied as they are shocking. You imagine whispered reports reaching the abbot. Anselm, it is said, hosts secret gatherings in the cellars, where wine flows and forbidden trysts unfold. Chronicles of the time hint at such excesses, monks accused of sodomy, lechery, or coercing novices into sinful acts, though evidence is often veiled in euphemisms like abominations. You envision a novice, trembling in the scriptorium, confessing to another, "He bade me join him after Compline, promising God's favour." The boy's voice breaks, his faith shaken by Anselm's betrayal. These acts, whether with men or women from nearby villages, turn the monastery into a crucible of sin. Its sacred halls defiled by a man who wields power like a blade. The monastery's wealth fuels this corruption. You walk its cloisters, the air heavy with the scent of spiced meat from illicit feasts, the clink of coins from tithes echoing in the almonry. By the 13th century, monasteries like St. Albans or Cluny are economic giants, their lands yielding riches that tempt even the devout. The rule of St. Benedict demands poverty, but Anselm as prior controls the stores, wine, grain, gold, and uses them to curry favour. You see him slipping a silver coin to a lay brother, silencing questions with a smile. God rewards loyalty, brother. Historical records note such abuses, monks bribing subordinates, their vows eroded by wealth's allure. Anselm's charisma, once a gift, now binds others to his will, turning allies into accomplices. The psychological toll on the monastery is profound. You imagine a young monk, his prayers faltering in the chapel, his mind haunted by Anselm's influence. "Is this God's will?" he might whisper, his voice lost in the Psalms, his heart torn between loyalty and disgust. The novices, especially, bear the weight. Young men, often sent to the monastery as boys, vulnerable to Anselm's authority. Chronicles describe the despair of such youths, some fleeing, others trapped by fear of eternal damnation. Anselm, too, is not untouched. You envision him in his cell, the candle flickering, his prayers laced with guilt. "Lord, forgive my weakness." Yet his ambition drowns his remorse, his power a drug that blinds him to the ruin he sows. The monastery's complicity is its own sin. You hear the abbot's silence, his eyes averted as rumours grow, his authority undermined by Anselm's sway. Older monks, bound by loyalty or fear, turn away from the whispers, their chants a hollow shield against truth. Historical accounts, like those of the Chronicle of Melrose, note monasteries ignoring scandals to protect their reputation, only acting when forced by external pressure. Lay brothers and townsfolk, dependent on the abbey's charity, remain silent, their whispers confined to taverns. The prior's sins stain us all. The monastery, meant to be a beacon of holiness, becomes a fortress of secrets, its walls guarding Anselm's vices until they can no longer hold. The spices of this story lie in its visceral drama. You envision a midnight scene, Anselm in the cellar, his robes dishevelled, a novice trembling as wine spills on stone. God sees, but he forgives, Anselm might murmur, his voice a serpent's hiss, the novice's silence bought with fear. These imagined moments, grounded in Chronicles' hints of grievous sins, make the past pulse with life. You feel the monastery's decay, its air thick with betrayal, as Anselm's actions ripple outward, tainting all who dwell within. The sacred veil, once a symbol of devotion, is now a shroud, hiding a den of sin that threatens to burst into the light. Before we plunge deeper into this tale of corruption and betrayal, let's pause. If you're gripped by this clash of faith and vice, hit that like button and subscribe to uncover more hidden histories. Share your thoughts. Does Anselm's fall shock you, or is it a timeless tale of power's corruption? These stories connect us across centuries, revealing the fragility of holiness in the face of human desire. Now, as Anselm's sins grow bolder, the whispers spread beyond the monastery, drawing the eyes of bishops and the wrath of the church. The rumours cannot be contained forever. You stand in the chapter house, the air tense as a monk dares to speak. Brother Anselm defiles us, his voice low, his eyes darting to the abbot. The accusation, though whispered, is a spark in dry tinder, threatening to ignite a fire that will consume Anselm's power. Chronicles of the time, like those of Roger of Wendover, describe such moments, scandals erupting when silence breaks, forcing the church to act. Anselm, unaware or defiant, continues his indulgences, his charisma a shield against suspicion. But the walls are closing in, the monastery's sanctity fracturing under the weight of his sins. This is the heart of a tale where faith and depravity collide, where a monk's ambition turns a holy sanctuary into a den of sin. You feel the weight of the novice's fear, the monk's complicity, the townsfolk's whispers, all converging on Anselm's looming fall. The monastery, once a bastion of prayer, now teeters on the edge of infamy, its fate tied to a man whose desires have outstripped his vows. Join us as we follow the whispers beyond the cloister, where the church's judgment awaits, and Anselm's sins face the light of truth. You stand in the windswept courtyard of a 13th century Benedictine monastery, 1268, where the air bites with the chill of autumn and the sting of betrayal. The stone walls, once a shield for prayer, now echo with whispers that spill beyond the cloister, carried on the lips of monks, lay brothers, and townsfolk. At the centre of the storm is Brother Anselm, prior and would-be abbot, his once shining charisma now tarnished by rumours of debauchery. You see him stride through the gatehouse, his robes billowing, his eyes sharp with defiance as a bishop's entourage arrives, their horses' hooves clattering on cobblestones. The church, roused by tales of a monastery turned den of sin, has come to judge. You clutch your cloak, heart pounding, as the clash of faith and scandal ignites, threatening to consume Anselm and all he has corrupted. The whispers, once confined to the monastery's shadows, have grown too loud to ignore. You hear them in the marketplace beyond the abbey's walls, where townsfolk mutter over tankards of ale. The prior defiles God's house with lust and wine. Chronicles like those of Matthew Paris and Gerald of Wales record such scandals, monks accused of grievous abominations, their sins fueling public outrage and reformist zeal. Anselm's crimes, though partly legendary, mirror these tales. Secret gatherings in cellars, novices coerced into silence, village women lured by promises of divine favour. A young monk, his voice trembling, might have confessed to a visiting friar, "Brother Anselm leads us astray," his words sweet but poisoned. The accusation, like a spark in dry grass, reaches the bishop's ears, prompting a visitation to root out the rot. The church's response is both swift and calculated. You envision the bishop, a stern figure in crimson robes, dismounting in the courtyard, his eyes scanning the monastery as if to pierce its secrets. Visitations, as described in ecclesiastical records, were common in the 13th century, with bishops or archdeacons inspecting monasteries to enforce the rule of Saint Benedict. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 mandated such oversight to curb abuses, yet enforcement was uneven, often swayed by wealth or influence. Anselm, as prior, wields power, control over the abbey's riches, loyalty from some monks, but the bishop's authority is greater. You hear the prelate's voice cold as iron. "Brother Anselm, you stand accused of defiling this holy place." The words echo, a gauntlet thrown in a house of God. Anselm's defense is a masterstroke of charisma and defiance. You see him in the chapter house, his hands steady, his voice resonant as he faces the bishop. "My lord, these are lies spun by envious tongues," he might have declared, his eyes meeting the prelate's with unwavering confidence. Chronicles note such tactics. Accused monks denying charges, blaming rivals, or claiming divine forgiveness. Anselm, drawing on his rhetorical skill, paints himself as a servant of God, his sins mere rumours exaggerated by malcontents. "I have served this abbey faithfully," he insists, his words a shield, though you sense the flicker of fear in his gaze. Behind closed doors, he might have whispered to a loyal novice, "They seek to ruin me, but God will judge the truth." His defiance, though bold, is a fragile bulwark against the tide of evidence. The investigation is a crucible of tension. You stand in the cloister, watching monks summoned one by one to the bishop's chamber, their faces pale as they recount Anselm's deeds. A lay brother, his hands calloused from toil, might have stammered, "I saw him with a woman. My lord in the cellars after midnight." Another, a young novice, hesitates, torn between loyalty and truth, before confessing, "He bade me join his revels," promising absolution. These testimonies, though speculative, echo chronicles accounts of monastic scandals, where coerced confessions or whispered betrayals exposed corruption. The bishop, guided by canon law, seeks evidence of sodomy, lechery, or simony, crimes that could warrant penance, imprisonment, or worse. You feel the air grow heavier, the monastery's sanctity unravelling with each word. The psychological toll on Anselm is profound. You imagine him in his cell, the candle's flame flickering as he paces, his prayers faltering. "Lord, why do they turn against me?" he might whisper, his voice cracking, his mind a battlefield of guilt and defiance. Chronicles describe the torment of accused clerics, some crumbling under scrutiny, others clinging to their power. Anselm, torn between remorse and pride, sees enemies in every shadow. Monks he once charmed, novices he coerced, townsfolk he bribed. His charisma, once his strength, now isolates him, his allies dwindling as the bishop's net tightens. You feel his desperation, a man who sought to rule a monastery now fighting to save his soul. The monastery itself is divided. You hear the older monks, their voices low in the refectory, defending Anselm. He is our prior, chosen by God. Others, younger and bolder, whisper rebellion. His sins shame us all. The abbot, weakened by age or complicity, remains silent. His inaction a betrayal of the rule. Historical records, like those of the Chronicle of Melrose, note such divisions. Monasteries torn by scandal, their unity fractured by a leader's fall. The townsfolk, too, are caught in the storm, their faith shaken as they gather at the gates. If monks sin so, what hope for us? A baker might mutter, his words echoing public distrust recorded in satires like Boccaccio's Decameron. The monastery, once a beacon, now festers under Anselm's shadow. The spices of this story lie in its vivid drama. You envision a confrontation in the chapter house, the bishop's staff striking the floor as he accuses Anselm. You have turned God's house into a brothel. Anselm's retort, sharp and defiant, cuts through the silence. I am no devil, only a man. These imagined exchanges, grounded in Chronicle's tales of defiant clerics, bring the past to life. The monastery's decay is palpable, wine stains on sacred stones, novices' fearful glances, townsfolk's growing outrage. You feel the tension, the air thick with betrayal, as the bishop's investigation threatens to expose Anselm's sins to the world. The societal reaction is a mix of outrage and fascination. You see villagers crowding the abbey's gates, their voices rising. Punish the sinner! Yet some, drawn to scandal, whisper with morbid curiosity, as chroniclers note of medieval crowds. The church, protective of its reputation, treads carefully. Anselm's influence and the monastery's wealth demand caution. Canon law prescribes penalties, flogging, confinement, or exile. But powerful monks often escaped with lighter punishments, as seen in records of 13th century visitations. You sense the bishop's dilemma: destroy Anselm and risk the abbey's prestige, or shield him and invite further sin. The whispers, now a roar, demand action, and Anselm's fate hangs in the balance. This is the turning point of a tale where faith and corruption collide, where a monk's defiance faces the church's judgment. You stand in the courtyard, watching the bishop's entourage depart, their horses' hooves a drumbeat of reckoning. Anselm, still defiant, prepares for his trial, his charisma a fading shield against the truth. The monastery, its sanctity fractured, teeters on the edge of collapse, its fate tied to a man whose sins have outgrown his vows. Join us as we follow this scandal to its climax, where Anselm's fall will test the church's resolve and reveal the cost of turning a holy place into a den of sin. You stand in the cold, cavernous hall of a 13th century cathedral, 1268, where the air is thick with the scent of incense and the weight of divine judgment. The stained glass windows cast fractured light across the stone floor, their colours muted as if mourning the scene below. Before you, Brother Anselm, once the charismatic prior of a thriving monastery, kneels in chains, his once proud robes tattered, his eyes hollow with defiance and despair. The bishop, a towering figure in crimson, looms over him, his staff striking the floor like a gavel as he pronounces the verdict. You have defiled God's house with your sins. The gathered monks and townsfolk gasp, their whispers a storm that drowns Anselm's fading charisma. You clutch your cloak, heart pounding, as the man who turned a monastery into a den of sin faces the church's wrath. His fall a reckoning for all who enabled him. The trial, convened in the cathedral's chapter house, is a spectacle of justice and shame. Chronicles like those of Matthew Paris describe such scenes. Monks accused of grievous abominations facing ecclesiastical courts, their fates sealed by testimony and canon law. Anselm's crimes, a litany of lust, coercion, and misuse of monastic wealth, are laid bare. You see a trembling novice take the stand, his voice barely audible. He bade me join his revels, promising God's mercy. A lay brother, his hands calloused, recounts seeing Anselm with village women in the cellars, their laughter mingling with the clink of stolen wine. These testimonies, though partly speculative, echo historical accounts of monastic scandals, where coerced confessions or whispered betrayals toppled corrupt clerics. Anselm, his face pale, denies the worst. Lies, spun by jealous foes, he might have hissed, his voice sharp but cracking. His charisma no match for the weight of truth. The bishop's verdict is unrelenting. Canon law, as outlined in Gratian's Decretum, prescribes harsh penalties for monks guilty of sodomy, lechery, or simony, flogging, confinement, or exile to a stricter house. Anselm, stripped of his title as prior, faces a grimmer fate. Imprisonment in a monastic cell, a living death for a man who craved power. You envision the scene. Guards lead him from the cathedral, his chains clinking, his eyes darting to the monks who once called him brother. God will judge you all, he might have spat, his voice a mix of defiance and despair, as recorded in similar cases where fallen clerics cursed their accusers. The crowd, a mix of townsfolk and clergy, watches in silence, their faces a tapestry of shock, pity, and righteous anger. The punishment is both physical and symbolic. You see Anselm in a damp, windowless cell beneath the monastery, the air heavy with mould and regret. Chronicles note such penalties. Monks confined to dark prisons within abbeys, their lives reduced to bread, water, and prayer. His once fine robes are replaced with coarse sackcloth, his body scourged as penance, each lash a reminder of his broken vows. You imagine him kneeling, the stone bruising his knees, his prayers faltering. Lord, was I your servant or your fool? The psychological toll is crushing. His ambition, once a blazing fire, now ash. His charisma, a useless relic. Historical accounts describe the despair of fallen monks, some driven to madness, others to repentance. But Anselm's heart remains a battlefield, torn between remorse and pride. The monastery too faces a reckoning. You stand in the cloister, now eerily silent, as a new abbot, sent by the bishop, imposes reforms. The wine cellars are sealed, the feasts banned, the novices placed under stricter watch. Chronicles like those of the Chronicle of Melrose record such purges. Monasteries cleansed after scandals, their wealth audited, their rules tightened. The monks, shamed by their complicity, chant psalms with renewed fervour, their voices a plea for forgiveness. You hear a young monk whisper to another, "We let him lead us astray." The townsfolk gathered at the gates demand justice, their faith shaken by Anselm's sins. If monks fall, what hope for us? A woman might murmur, her words echoing public distrust noted in 13th century satires like Boccaccio's Decameron. The spices of this story lie in its visceral drama. You envision Anselm's final stand in the chapter house, his voice rising in defiance. "I served this abbey, and you betray me." The bishop's retort, cold as stone, cuts through. "You betrayed God." These imagined exchanges, grounded in Chronicles' accounts of defiant clerics, bring the trial to life. The cell's darkness, the lash's sting, the monk's whispered guilt, all paint a vivid picture of a monastery's fall. You feel the weight of Anselm's ruin, his once bright star extinguished by his own desires. The cathedral's silence, broken only by the bishop's verdict, is a requiem for a man who sought power but found only chains. The broader consequences ripple outward. You see the monastery's reputation tarnished, its tithes dwindling as villagers turn to rival abbeys. The church, wary of further scandal, strengthens its reforms, as seen in the Cistercian purges of the time, though corruption persists. Anselm's name, once spoken with awe, becomes a cautionary tale, whispered in taverns and chronicled in veiled terms. You imagine a monk, years later, reading Anselm's story in a dusty manuscript, his heart heavy. He was one of us, yet fell so far. Historical records note such legacies. Fallen clerics like John of Wallingford, their sins exaggerated to fuel reformist zeal, their lives a warning to the faithful. Anselm's final moments, real or imagined, are a study in human frailty. You envision him in his cell, the candle long extinguished, his fingers tracing the stone walls as he whispers a final prayer. God, see my soul, not my sins. Whether he finds repentance or clings to defiance, his fate is sealed, a man of God reduced to a prisoner of his own desires. Chronicles describe such ends. Some monks died in confinement. Others were exiled to distant houses, their names erased from the abbey's annals. Anselm's fall, though partly legend, mirrors these truths, a testament to the fragility of faith in the face of power. This is the climax of a tale where ambition and sin collide, where a monk's fall shatters a monastery's sanctity. You stand in the cathedral's fading light, the crowd dispersing, their whispers carrying Anselm's name into infamy. The monastery, purged of his influence, seeks redemption, but the scars remain, etched in stone and memory. His story, a blend of fact and legend, is a mirror for the Church's struggle with human weakness, a warning of the cost of unchecked power. Join us as we explore the legacy of this scandal, where Anselm's sins cast long shadows and the monastery's cleansing reveals the enduring battle between faith and frailty. You stand in the quiet ruins of a 13th century monastery, 1270, where the wind whispers through crumbling arches, carrying the faint echo of long silent chants. The stone walls, once vibrant with prayer, now stand weathered, their scars a testament to a scandal that shook the faithful. The air is heavy with the scent of moss and memory, the ghosts of Brother Anselm's sins lingering in the shadows. His name, once spoken with awe, is now a curse, a cautionary tale etched in chronicles and whispered in taverns. The monastery, cleansed of his influence, stands reborn, yet the stain of his depravity endures, a mirror to the frailty of faith and the seductive pull of power. You clutch your cloak, heart heavy, as you step into the aftermath of Anselm's fall, where his legacy weaves a tapestry of shame, reform, and enduring lessons. Anselm's downfall, though rooted in the specific sins of a man who turned a sacred cloister into a den of vice, is more than a personal tragedy. It is a window into the medieval Church's struggle with corruption. Chronicles like those of Matthew Paris and Gerald of Wales brim with tales of wayward monks, their excesses, lechery, sodomy, simony, fueling public distrust and reformist zeal. Anselm, a composite figure inspired by such stories, embodies this tension, a man of God whose ambition and desires corrupted a monastery's sanctity. You imagine a monk, years after the scandal, poring over a dusty manuscript in the scriptorium, his quill pausing as he reads of Anselm's crimes. "He was one of us," he might whisper, his voice trembling, yet he fell so far. The historical record, though often veiled in euphemisms, confirms such scandals. Monasteries fined, abbots deposed, their sins a catalyst for change. The immediate aftermath of Anselm's trial is a storm of consequences. You see the monastery's gates, once bustling with pilgrims, now quiet, its tithes dwindling as villagers turn to rival abbeys. The new abbot, a stern reformer sent by the bishop, imposes strict measures. Wine cellars are emptied, feasts replaced with bread and water, novices watched with hawk-like vigilance. Chronicles, like those of the Chronicle of Melrose, describe such purges. Monasteries cleansed after scandals, their rules tightened to restore faith. You hear the monks' chants, their voices fervent, as if to drown out the memory of Anselm's revels. The townsfolk, gathered in the marketplace, speak in hushed tones. The abbey is pure again, but at what cost? Their distrust, echoed in 13th century satires like Boccaccio's Decameron, reflects a broader disillusionment with a church that promised salvation, yet harboured sin. Anselm's legacy, however, is not confined to the monastery's walls. It ripples through the church and society. You envision a bishop in a distant cathedral, his sermons now sharper, warning of wolves in monks' clothing. The scandal fuels reformist movements like the Cistercian purges or the mandates of the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215, which sought to curb monastic excesses. Historical records show mixed success. While some abbeys embraced austerity, others slipped back into corruption, their wealth a perennial temptation. Anselm's story, though partly legend, becomes a rallying cry for reformers, his name a synonym for hypocrisy. You imagine a chronicler, his quill scratching late into the night, exaggerating Anselm's sins to serve a reformist agenda. He turned God's house into a brothel, the text might read, blending truth with sensationalism to shock the faithful. Debunking the myths surrounding Anselm is crucial to understanding his true impact. Chronicles, often written by biased monks or reformist clerics, inflate scandals to push agendas or settle scores. You see a modern historian, perhaps in 2025, sifting through these texts, noting the lack of concrete evidence, no court records, only vague accusations of abominations. Figures like John of Wallingford, accused of vice in later tales, suffer similar exaggeration, their sins amplified to vilify rivals or justify reforms. Anselm's crimes, illicit gatherings, coercion of novices, liaisons with villagers, are likely true in part, as chronicles attest to similar monastic abuses. Yet the most perverted monk label is a construct, a composite of real scandals woven into a single sensational tale. You feel the weight of this truth, the line between fact and fiction blurred by centuries of judgment. The psychological toll of Anselm's legacy lingers in the monastery's collective memory. You imagine a young novice, years after the trial, praying in the chapel, his eyes darting to the shadows, as if Anselm's ghost still lingers. "We are stained by his sins," he might whisper to a companion, his faith shaken by the betrayal of a man he once admired. The older monks, complicit in their silence, bear their own guilt, their prayers a plea for redemption. Historical accounts note such trauma, monasteries struggling to regain trust, their communities fractured by scandal. Anselm himself, confined to a cell or exiled to a distant house, faces his own torment. You envision him, his hair greying, his hands tracing the walls of his prison. God, did I seek you or myself? Whether he finds repentance or clings to defiance, his soul remains a battlefield, as chroniclers describe of fallen clerics. The broader societal impact is profound. You see villagers in the tavern, their voices bitter. If monks sin so, what hope for us? This distrust, recorded in medieval satires and sermons, weakens the Church's moral authority, paving the way for later upheavals like the Reformation. Anselm's story, though local, reflects a universal truth. Power corrupts, and faith is fragile. You imagine a travelling friar preaching in a nearby village, using Anselm's fall to warn of hypocrisy. Beware those who wear God's robes, but serve their own desires. Vai. The tale spreads, becoming legend, its details distorted, but its lesson enduring. Even holy men are human, their vows no shield against temptation. The spices of this story lie in its human drama. You envision a scene years later. A monk, now old, standing in the ruined cloister, whispering to a novice, "Anselm was our star, but he burned us all." The imagined dialogue captures the pain of betrayal, grounded in chronicles' accounts of monastic regret. The monastery's ruins, overgrown with ivy, become a metaphor for Anselm's legacy, a once bright sanctuary dimmed by sin. You feel the weight of his story, its echoes in the wind, as townsfolk pass down tales of the perverted monk, their words a mix of truth and myth. These moments make the past vivid, a mirror for our own struggles with hypocrisy and power. Modern parallels breathe new life into Anselm's tale. You see shadows of his story in contemporary scandals, religious leaders, cloaked in piety, exposed for abuse or corruption. The Catholic Church's struggles with clergy misconduct, documented in 21st century reports, echo Anselm's fall, their institutions grappling with the same tension, faith versus human frailty. You imagine a modern priest reading Anselm's story, his heart heavy. We still fight the same demons. The lesson is timeless. Power, unchecked, breeds corruption, and silence enables sin. Anselm's legacy is a warning, urging vigilance against those who hide vice behind virtue. The monastery, rebuilt in spirit if not stone, stands as a testament to resilience. You see monks chanting in the restored chapel, their voices a plea for redemption, their lives stricter but not immune to temptation. Historical records show monasteries recovering from scandals, their reforms a fragile shield against future sins. Anselm's name fades, but his story endures, a cautionary tale in chronicles and sermons. You imagine a chronicler centuries later writing, "He sought God, but found only himself." The words, though speculative, capture the heart of his tragedy, a man whose ambition outstripped his faith, whose sins cast long shadows. You step back from the ruins, the wind carrying the monastery's ghosts, and reflect on Anselm's legacy. His story, a blend of fact and legend, is a mirror for the Church's struggle with human weakness, a reminder that even sacred vows can crumble under temptation's weight. You feel the presence of those he betrayed, novices, monks, townsfolk, whose faith was tested by his sins. What if Anselm had resisted? What if the monastery had acted sooner? These questions linger, unanswered, urging us to challenge hypocrisy in our own time. Let us honor the fallen by seeking truth, by questioning those who wield power in God's name. Join us for more forgotten histories, where the shadows of sin reveal the enduring battle between faith and frailty.